Hello, my name is Bryant Hunt. My channel simply is Discerning What is True. Um, going to be reading from a book I've been reading from for the past couple of weeks, deal with the issue of the Kabbalah, which is psychology and Kabbalah. We've gotten to the point of chapter 26 is where I'm at. Chapter 26 is Ego-Yesod, Y-E-S-O-D. According to many psychologists, welcome to the show, folks. According to many psychologists, the infantile ego is created by the interaction of the outer and inner worlds. The astrologer takes this further by saying that the position of the moon in sign and house gives the ego a particular character. The Kabbalist sees the ego as the focus of many processes, between the upper face of the body and the lower face of the psyche, as center impressions and psychological activity ebb and flow along the paths and around the sub-triads, centered on the Yesod of ego. The Freudians see the ego as its execution function that emerges from frustration of the infant as it learns to control and discharge the sensor motor stimulus. It produces images of reality and fantasies which govern the exchanges between from the conscious and the unconscious level. The fact that there are different views of the same reality is in itself an example of how the ego perceives according to this disposition and training. The ego's chief duty is to give continuity into what it experiences. This is done by memory, which is the recording of midrash, or perceptions that form patterns in the mind and brain. Out of this process comes recall of the past and imagination about the future when seen in the light of the present. Initially, the ego cannot tell the difference between inner and outer worlds, but as the infinite becomes familiar with its body and the environment, it develops what is called the, quote, reality principle, end quote. This enables the infinite to see what is feasible and what is not, and much time is spent in testing this principle to find its limits. In Kabbalistic terms, the Ego-Yesod starts to differential from its makut through experience and to distinguish between body and psyche, as it acquires the ability to control the impulses of the id and nefesh, and segregates the psychological process of thinking, feeling, and behavior. Because of the tree mode, Kabbalistic argued that a form already exists with inbuilt tendencies which are simply filled out by experience, and that the Ego-Yesod is the non-luminous mirror that reflects an image according to its particular constitution, which is governed by factors such as karma and stage of development. It is not just a virgin wax to be worked upon, as many psychologists believe. The delay created by the ego of immediately reaction to a situation because the baby recognizes it will not get the desired results turns the primary process of perceiving an object into the secondary process of negotiating with the outer world. Over time, the picture of reality is built up, and finer powers of discrimination and manipulation are acquired as the paths and the triads of the lower face of the psychological tree becomes more and more fused into the upper face of the body tree. Accuracy of perception and precision of response are enhanced by the learning and use of symbols, which become charged with meaning in a moment of consciousness, and then pass across the limited line between Hod, H-O-D, and Nezad, N-E-Z-A-H, to take up a position with others of like kind in the unconscious. An example of this is learning to tell the time. There is a moment when the numbers and hands on the clock face cease to be just objects and become image of certain hours and minutes of the day. When this occurs, the clock is no longer seen objectively. Thus 9 o'clock is when one should be in school, and noon is the time to go home. All these associations and minutes more pass through ego consciousness and disappear into the unconscious, where they are stored according to classification in the triads of concepts and emotion. Some of these early memories will be pleasant and some otherwise, and this will determine to which side of the tree they will be drawn. Meanwhile, the ego-yesod slowly constructs a general image of the outside world and where the person fits into it. Here it must be said that the simultaneous capacity for imagery is also built up in the ego, which clothes the impulse of the ID nefesh and the activities of the unconscious in forms that occur in dreams and daytime fantasies. These will be dealt with in detail later, but it should be noted at this point that such internal imaging occupies much of the time and energy of a children and not a few adults. In some cases, as in children, it is just play to pass the time or to enact a situation that is not possible in our reality. In others, it is a way of attaining a release for inner tensions that cannot be met otherwise, and in yet others, it is simply a form of escapism. Conversely, this is the mechanism by which creative people invent new forms of art, science, business, or what you will. Most people have their daydreams though. Some use them to relax in mental reverie. Others do it as an active replay of what they should have said and done in this or that situation, while others employ this yesada faculty to plan strategics or anticipate what has or will happen. All this inner ego activity in many individuals is related to outer reality, so that for the most part, it does not interfere directly with the perception of the external world, I should say. However, in case of trauma or fever, the yesada capacity for imagery can take over and appear quite real in illusions. In more serious situations of psychological disturbance, fantasies can become illusions that totally block out external reality in transit or cyclical periods. When a deluded ego cannot perceive the difference between internal or external reality, the state of insanity reigns. It has a figure here, number 30, of ego. The moon is an ancient symbol for the ordinary mind. In short, it changes every day and has many moods. It also has a side that is never seen. Even though its cycle, rocking, R-O-C-K-I-N-G, reveals the edges of its hidden aspect, the moon, moreover, like the ego, is a reflective principle, projecting upon the screen of the prevailing persona what it wishes to be seen and shown. Like the moon, the ego has a shadow aspect that can hide the craters, or many sub-personalities you see, from oneself as well as others. The reality principle is crucial in the development of the ego. From the Kabbalistic view, it anchors the yesod of the psyche to the dot of the body and makes the maku of Yesara lock into the physical teferel of Isaiah. From the Freudian view, it enables the person to make use of the ID's vitality and convert it into whatever practical application is needed. An appreciation of outer reality also brings about a sense of identity that, quote, over time establishes a recognizable place in the world. As the ego-yesod learns about what is real, so its capacity enlarges in both the inner and outer realms. This means that an increasing exchange of experiences is processed and relates to the acquisition of knowledge and skills which greatly influence the person's outlook and personal values. The persona or mask an individual wears over the face of the ego is the image that is required by circumstances These, however, can change radically, as in time of war or personal crisis, when there can be moments or even long periods when none of the mass a person has acquired can shield them from what is happening, and the naked ego has to deal with things directly. In many cases, like in military combat, only discipline applies by others can prevent breakdown. In equally strenuous circumstances, like failing an important ambition, the initiative shot can generate great confusion until a new mask is put on to protect the ego. The widow donning black and the rejected lover putting on a brave face are examples. There are those, however, who do not have a strong ego that can withstand the knocks of life, who crumble because their sense of ego identity is basically insecure. They often not only fear the world at large, but also themselves, as they cannot always contain the powerful ID-nefesh urges that arises in a crisis such as panic, for example. Some people cannot cope, and infantile drives that have never been quite bridled by the ego burst out. The reality principle is lost in anything from a childish suck to a psychotic suicide or homicidal episode. Such incidents are often the work of the shadow side of the ego, as the persona is the front of the ego's image. So the shadow is that which is not seen, at least by ourselves, because most of us hide our less desirable traits behind what we project in our ego image. These unacceptable elements of our nature have their roots in the primitive powers of the ID-nefesh. Fortunately, they are usually held and checked by the ego and individual social personality. However, such potent drives arising from the body, and not a few from perverse elements in the psyche, do penetrate through the ego under certain conditions, such as, for example, the stress of a marital breakdown, when terrible things are said and done. When Freud introduced this dark dimension, he hit an enormous resistance in the very prudish but sensitive 19th century Vienna society of his time. Two horrified world wars revealed the shadow side of thousands of so-called decent people on both sides, when the veneer of civilization was peeled off in combat and millions died most violently. This sinister element, Freud observed, may be well concealed by pleasant matters, but the ego does not always succeed in stopping it from filtering through in the unconscious slips of the tongue and actions that avoid Yesod and come down or up the side pillars between Malkut, Hod, and Yesod. More on the shadow later. The ego is the outer reception center of the psyche, inasmuch as it acts as the screening consciousness for the moment-by-moment perception of life, as it interprets sense data and operates the voluntary and motor systems to respond to physical reality. It also checks and balances moods, thoughts, and behavior of the lower psyche. These manifest as various personas that make up a personality from what has been interjected or absorbed from the parents in particular and from the environment in general. Thus, a combination of external influences and individual tendencies based upon genetic and inherited qualities, together with the karma and cosmic set of the incarnated psyche, are synthesized to make up the distinct character of an ego. Being essentially a facilitator, the Jasada ego has the faculty of adjusting to circumstances. This, in most people, is often limited. Once the personality has become fixed, for a few people are prepared to change after maturity, although the ego can be forced by dramatic circumstances, like becoming a prisoner of war, to cope with changing conditions. This, however, becomes increasingly difficult with the years, as many middle-aged people discover as they find the world begins to regard their values, skills, and manners as old-fashioned. In Kabbalah, the ego is regarded as a talented steward who serves the master of the self. With its vast array of skills, it can perform and protect. provided it does not seek to steal the self role. One of the first lessons in inner development is to perceive the Jasada ego as an entity within the psyche and not. As most people consider it one identity, the ego is the instrument by which we can see the interior and the exterior world. Its capacity as quote, not quote, as go between should not be underestimated, but neither should it be given credit beyond its scope. In some spiritual disciplines, the ego is denigrated because it is considered to be inferior and gross. In Kabbalah, it is seen as the variable foundation of the psyche, and as such, it should be encouraged to perform well. This leads up to the third component of Freud's basic system, the superego-idea, which counterbalances the ego and the id. So that's the conclusion of chapter 26 tonight. Again, this is a book written years ago called Psychology and Kabbalah. I don't have the book right here in front of me. I must have misplaced it. I moved it, I guess. Anyway, the point of it is you can look at it. Again, this is from a gentleman who moved to moved to England long ago, in the 1930s, with his family, and he began to look into this type of thing. Thank you for being here, and take care. Have a good night.